The desert night was heavy with silence. In December 1941, under the frozen brilliance of the Libyan sky, an army lay waiting. Engines had been cut hours earlier. Every man crouched low in the sand, afraid that the scrape of a boot or the click of a rifle bolt might betray them. The wind dragged grains of sand across steel hulls and canvas tarps. Beyond the ridgeline, just out of sight, German troops slept in their tents. Yet only a few hundred yards away, British and Commonwealth soldiers lay in wait. The minutes dragged. Then, with a sudden hiss, a flare streaked into the sky. It burst above the dunes, washing the desert in white light. In that instant, the stillness shattered. Machine guns rattled from hidden positions. Mortars thumped. Fuel trucks and half-tracks erupted in fire before their engines even started. The sleeping camp dissolved into chaos as it was over almost as soon as it began. Flames rose against the night sky, and when dawn broke over the dunes, the desert fox himself would feel the shock. An ambush, carefully planned and mercilessly executed, had struck at the heart of his war machine. North Africa mattered for one simple reason. It was the gateway to the Mediterranean, and at its center stood the Suez Canal. For Britain, Suez was more than a waterway. It was the artery that connected London to its empire in India, Australia, and the Middle East. If that artery was cut, Britain would be strangled. General Erwin Rommel arrived in Libya with the newly formed Afrika Korps in early 1941. He wasted no time in showing his style. Bold, aggressive, and relentless, he hurled his troops across the desert with breathtaking speed. His enemies began calling him the Desert Fox, a commander who seemed to appear where he was least expected, always a step ahead. But Rommel's brilliance carried a hidden weakness. His lightning offensives consumed fuel and ammunition faster than they could be delivered. Every shell, every spare part, every drop of petrol had to be ferried across the Mediterranean. If that flow stopped, his advance would grind to a halt. By late 1941, the strain was showing. Supply depots and fuel convoys sprawled across open desert, vulnerable and exposed. For the first time, his army's beating heart was within reach. The Germans had better coordination, better equipment, and a commander with uncanny instincts. But Auchinleck's staff also knew a simple truth about desert warfare. Fuel mattered more than firepower. A tank without petrol was a steel coffin. The desert rewarded boldness, but it punished overextension, and Rommel was overextended. Convoys of trucks carrying fuel and ammunition had to crawl across miles of open desert. If those convoys could be struck, the Desert Fox could be brought to a standstill before he ever reached the battlefield. British intelligence was beginning to catch up. The plan that followed was as simple as it was dangerous. Ambush the supply columns, destroy them before they could reach the front. The desert, which had so often given him victory, was about to turn against him. At the center of the desert war stood two men whose personalities shaped everything that happened. On one side was Erwin Rommel, commander of the Afrika Korps. On the other was Auchinleck, commander-in-chief of the British forces in the Middle East. Rommel's habit of outrunning his supply lines meant that his victories often depended on thin margins. His army could lunge forward with terrifying momentum, but it was always hungry for fuel, for ammunition, for replacements that were slow to arrive. On the British side, Auchinleck was a very different figure. He saw the war not as a fox, then Auchinleck was the hunter who laid the traps. The British had realized that Rommel's offensive strength could not be sustained without fuel. His panzers could move fast, but they burned through thousands of liters of petrol every day. It was here, on these lifelines, that the British began to turn the war in ways less visible than tank battles, but no less decisive. The desert itself became an ally. At night, the open plains swallowed sound. Engines could be cut, and men could wait in the cold silence while the distant rumble of German trucks drew closer. The first ambushes were small. The British would wait until the lead vehicle entered the killing zone, then open fire all at once. Trucks burst into flames, drivers scattered, but with each raid, the British learned. By late December, entire convoys were being wiped out in sudden, devastating ambushes. The Afrika Korps, so used to being the hunter, was finding itself hunted. By the final days of December 1941, the war in North Africa reached a knife's edge. British intelligence, piecing together intercepted signals and reports from reconnaissance patrols, identified a major supply convoy moving toward Rommel's forward positions. The convoy was heavy with fuel, ammunition, and rations. If it reached its destination, Rommel could regroup and counterattack. If it was destroyed, his army would be paralyzed. The ambush was planned with ruthless precision. Then they waited, engines silent, nerves stretched tight. Night fell, cold and heavy. Finally, a faint vibration carried across the sand. The convoy was approaching. The British held their fire. Patience was everything. Then at the signal, the desert erupted. Artillery crashed down onto the lead vehicles. Machine guns raked the length of the convoy. Mortars thumped shells into the rears. In seconds, the convoy was in chaos, ammunition detonating in spectacular fireballs. Some German armored cars tried to respond, but they were caught almost instantly by armor-piercing rounds from hidden British guns. Some described the attack as a storm from nowhere. For the British, the victory was more than material. It was proof. Proof that Rommel could Germany entered the desert with an army hardened by victories in Europe. But it was always fighting at the end of a long tether. Every tank, every gun, every truck had to be shipped across the Mediterranean from Italy. The British could afford setbacks to replace losses and to keep fighting. For the Germans, each loss in the desert was permanent. Rommel's army became a beggar, pleading for more supplies that never arrived. Meanwhile, British industry adapted to the desert war. For the German side, like an enemy. Some captured reports speak of the terror when an ambush began. The sand would erupt with machine gun fire, and within seconds dozens of vehicles could be ablaze. Survivors describe the smell. Burning fuel, rubber and flesh mingled into something unforgettable. Those who lived carried it with them long after. The memory of comrades screaming from inside trucks that became furnaces. The ambushes of late 1941 and early 1942 did more than destroy trucks and supplies. They reshaped the entire rhythm of the Desert War. German armored thrusts lost their momentum as fuel shortages grew worse. Panzers that should have punched through British lines found themselves stranded, unable to move. Artillery batteries rationed shells, firing only when targets were certain, unable to waste ammunition on probing fire. Even Rommel's famed use of the 88mm guns was limited by dwindling supplies. The Afrika Korps was no longer free to operate at will. It was shackled to the fragile trickle of supplies that survived the ambushes. Spoke of the desert itself as their ally, how it hid them, swallowed their tracks, and turned German lifelines into death traps. The British had stumbled onto a principle that would echo through the rest of the war: the power of targeting logistics. The war in North Africa was far from over. Battles fought with a shadow over his shoulder, knowing his enemy had found a way to bleed him that no tank assault in the desert night, when a handful of men waited in silence, and a convoy